The helicopter lifted into the morning sky, its rotors chopping through the haze of smoke and dust. Major Kane kept the A-10 low, hugging the treetops, the engines screaming every vibration, a reminder of how close the aircraft had come to breaking. She scanned the forest below the SEALs, now safe in the chopper, but the enemy still scattered among the trees, their positions hidden but deadly, the radar flickering with movement signaling that the fight was far from over. Her hands tightened on. The controls, the canopy, reflecting the rising sun in harsh streaks. The smell of burnt foliage and metal filling her nostrils, every nerve alive with tension. She dove through a narrow corridor between two massive oaks, scraping the canopy. The Gault, roaring as she fired short controlled bursts into the densest enemy clusters, the explosions sending debris and smoke into the air. The recoil shaking the aircraft violently, but clearing paths for the extraction above the rotor wash from the helicopter, stirred the forest below, making the enemy fire sporadic and unpredictable. Kane twisted the aircraft hard, banking low beneath hanging branches, bullets whipping past her canopy, sparks dancing from every impact, the SEALs' voices on the comms sharp. With relief but still tense, warning her of unseen positions. Smoke and debris filled the forest, the air thick and hot. Kane banked sharply, dodging falling branches that snapped under the cannon fire, the radar lighting up with multiple new blips. Enemy units attempting to flank from hidden angles below the helicopter, the SEALs moving carefully, each step measured, their rifles cracking intermittently as they provided cover for the final approach. She fired again, controlled bursts. The GAU-8, screaming in short, violent roars, clearing enemy cover. The fuselage trembling from every impact, sparks flying as the wingtips brushed tree limbs, her heart hammering in rhythm with the engines, the path ahead narrow and lethal. The SEALs were halfway. Across a clearing now, the enemy intensifying fire from all sides. Kane twisted the aircraft, banking low, the right wing groaning as bullets struck the fuselage, alarms blaring in the cockpit. But she held steady, her eyes fixed on the team, and clearing the radar, showing unseen threats converging from both flanks, the forest alive with the sound of snapping branches, tracer rounds, and explosions. Her mind calculating every move in milliseconds, knowing one wrong adjustment would be fatal. She fired short bursts into the densest pockets of fire, the explosions sending smoke and splinters cascading down to the ground, the SEALs moving like shadows under her protection. The helicopter was almost at the far edge of the clearing. The rotor, wash kicking up clouds of dust and leaves, the SEALs sprinting to reach the waiting aircraft. Kane banked sharply, following their path, weaving through trees, barely clearing branches, the engines screaming, sparks flying from the fuselage from impacts. With debris bullets ripping through the underbrush, she fired again, the GAU-8 cannon spitting fire into the densest enemy positions, the recoil throwing the aircraft into shallow rolls. But she held steady, the path below clear enough for the team to advance. Yet every new blip on the radar warned of danger still lurking unseen. Smoke and heat hung heavy in the air. The SEALs now almost at the helicopter, the enemy attempting one last desperate flank. Kane twisted the aircraft low through the tree-lined, bullets cracking around her, sparks flying as branches shredded against the fuselage, the engines straining under the impossible maneuvers. Her hands burned from gripping the controls, every movement a negotiation with death every second. A gamble, the SEALs diving behind cover as she fired bursts to clear the remaining positions. Explosions echoing through the forest. The radar lighting up with unseen threats closing in fast. The clearing almost in reach but not yet safe. She dove low into a narrow corridor, the canopy brushing her helmet, the fuselage trembling violently from the strain, the GAU-8 cannon roaring as she unleashed another pass into enemy clusters, the recoil shaking the aircraft violently but clearing the way. The SEALs sprinting in short bursts, each one a risk, against the relentless fire surrounding them. Kane twisted hard, banking beneath branches, dodging falling debris, sparks flying from the wingtips as the aircraft strained under the stress, the engines screaming in protest, her eyes locked on the team and the path ahead. Finally, the SEALs reached the helicopter. The rotors kicking up clouds of dust and leaves, Kane banked low one last pass, firing controlled bursts into the remaining enemy positions. Explosions rippling through the forest, smoke curling around the trees, the aircraft trembling under every shot, the engines screaming, the radar flickering with new blips. But now the path behind the team clear enough for the helicopter to lift and escape. Her hands shook from the strain, the canopy reflecting harsh sunlight, the forest alive with smoke fire and debris. Yet the SEALs were moving into relative safety, and Kane realized that despite the damage to the A-10, despite the enemy fire, she had held the line and the mission had survived. But even as the helicopter lifted, the forest still held danger hidden in every shadow, the radar flickering with movement. Kane adjusted the controls one last time, her pulse hammering, knowing that the fight was not over, and the path to safety was still a razor edge of risk and precision, with the enemy still lying in wait and the A-10 barely holding together under the impossible strain of her flight. The helicopter lifted higher above the treetops, the SEALs finally breathing in relief as the forest fell away beneath them. Major Kane kept the A-10 low, hugging the tree line, the engines screaming every vibration, a reminder of how close the aircraft had come to breaking. Her eyes flicked constantly between the HUD and the radar, each blip a potential threat, the forest behind them still alive with enemy fire and hidden positions ready to strike if she faltered. She gritted her teeth, adjusting the throttle, pushing the A-10 forward. Through the narrow corridors, the fuselage trembling violently, sparks flying from the wings, where branches had scraped the edges, the smoke curling in trails around the trees. The SEALs radioed over the comms, thanking her for covering their extraction, their voices tight with exhaustion and relief. Kane nodded, even though they could not see her, knowing the danger was far from over. The enemy was still regrouping below, moving fast, attempting to intercept the helicopter on its escape route. Twisted the aircraft hard, banking low beneath hanging branches, bullets cracking past the canopy. Each ricochet a reminder of the razor-thin margin for error. Her finger hovered over the GAU-8 trigger, ready to fire controlled bursts into any cluster of fire that threatened the team below, every movement precise, every second a negotiation with death. The forest stretched endlessly around her, the canopy thick and dense, the sun glinting off leaves, masking the positions of enemy combatants. Kane dove low into a narrow gap, the engines screaming, the fuselage shaking violently, the radar lighting up with multiple new blips approaching from hidden angles. Her hands flew over the controls, adjusting the aircraft for every jolt, every snap of wood and ricochet of bullets. Sparks danced along the wings from branches clipped in impossible maneuvers, the SEALs moving below like shadows under the veil of her fire, the helicopter inches closer to safety, but the enemy attempting a last desperate, flanked the tension coiling in Kane like a live wire. She fired short bursts into the densest pockets of enemy positions, explosions ripping through the forest, debris falling around the helicopter, the recoil shaking the A-10 violently, yet she held. Steady, every movement critical. The SEALs ducking behind cover their rifles, firing in short bursts to provide suppressing fire, her pulse hammering in rhythm with the roar of the engines, the radar flickering with unseen threats closing in fast. Every blip a potential death sentence, if she misjudged the path even slightly. Smoke and fire filled the air. The canopy twisting overhead, Kane banked sharply, weaving between trees, brushing against branches, the engines screaming, sparks flying from every impact, the aircraft trembling under the impossible strain. Below, the SEALs sprinted toward the helicopter, their movements precise but vulnerable, bullets whizzing past them, cutting dangerous arcs around their shadows. She adjusted her aim, firing another controlled pass, the explosions sending smoke curling through the trees, the ground beneath alive with fire and debris. Yet the helicopter moved steadily toward the open sky, the extraction finally within reach, the radar lit up with one last cluster of enemy positions. Kane twisted the aircraft one final time, lining up for a strafing run. the GAU-8 roaring explosions ripping through the forest, the fuselage trembling violently, the engines screaming, the canopy reflecting sunlight. In harsh streaks, she held the aircraft steady, covering the last stretch of the SEAL's path, ensuring that every threat below was suppressed, every angle cleared. Her mind racing, calculating every move, every millisecond, the forest alive with danger and fire. Yet the helicopter now hovering above the clearing, the rotors cutting through smoke and dust, signaling the final escape. The SEALs leapt aboard the helicopter one by one. Kane watched through the canopy, guiding the A-10 low along the extraction. Path every second critical. The enemy still firing sporadically, the engines screaming, the aircraft trembling under the stress, but she held steady. Every blip on the radar accounted for every potential threat, suppressed by her fire. The helicopter, lifting higher, the forest stretching below like a living trap, ready to engulf any mistake. Sparks flew from the wingtips where branches had clipped the aircraft. She twisted hard, banking low around a fallen trunk, the GA. The forest canopy pressed down like a living ceiling as Major Kane guided the A-10 through the twisting gaps between trees, her hands locked on the controls, the engines screaming every vibration, a warning, the SEALs moving below through smoke and debris, their progress measured but perilous. The enemy had regrouped despite the destruction she had wrought. Their movements calculated, their fire sporadic but deadly, the forest alive with echoes of gunfire and the occasional crash of a falling branch. From her strafing run, Kane twisted the aircraft hard, banking low through a narrow corridor, the wingtips scraping leaves, sparks dancing along the fuselage, her eyes scanning for any new blip, the radar flickering with shadows that could mean death at any second. The SEALs were pinned at the edge of a clearing, Harris shouting over the comms, calling for suppression cover fire, their voices sharp but tight with panic. Kane adjusted the throttle, pushing the A-10 lower than anyone had thought possible, the canopy brushing the tallest branches as she dove toward the ridge, her mind calculating angles, speed, and trajectory in milliseconds. The GAU-8 cannon spat fire once again, ripping through enemy positions, the recoil throwing the plane into a shallow roll. But she held steady, the smoke curling around the trees, hiding the SEALs for just enough time to move toward cover. Yet she knew this was temporary. The enemy shifting faster than she could fire bullets, cutting through the underbrush, leaving trails of danger in their wake. A sudden impact jolted the aircraft, a hail of rounds from the ridge, striking the right wing. Kane felt the vibration through every bone, the alarms screaming at her systems overloading. But she ignored them. Eyes fixed on the clearing below, the SEALs crouched low, moving in bursts between cover. She pushed the throttle forward, weaving between branches, the engine screaming as sparks flew from wingtips, clipping the edge of a tree, the canopy shaking violently. She fired short bursts again into the densest enemy clusters, explosions ripping through the forest, the concussion rattling her skull, but the path below clearing even as the radar lit up with new threats converging from unseen angles. The SEALs moved closer to the extraction point, but the enemy had cut off one side of the clearing, forcing them to change direction, bullets tearing through the foliage around them. Kane banked hard, following the twist of the forest, the trees blurring past, the canopy brushing against her helmet as she maneuvered the crippled aircraft through impossible angles. Each movement a delicate negotiation with death, each second a balance between survival and precision. The GAU-8 roared again, shaking the fuselage, sending debris raining across the clearing, sparks flying from the trees as some branches ignited under the fire. She twisted the aircraft over a narrow gully, the radar showing multiple enemy positions hidden beneath the canopy, their movements unpredictable and fast. The SEALs moved in rhythm with her fire, dashing between cover-returning short bursts, as Kane fired over them, suppressing every visible threat. But the forest was alive with more than she could see, branches snapping, enemy voices calling. Orders bullets ripping through the undergrowth, the tension coiling in her stomach like a live wire. She leveled the A-10 just long enough to line up another strafing pass, the aircraft trembling from the stress, the engines roaring in protest. The trees looming dangerously close on either side, smoke and dust hung thick in the air. The SEALs halfway across the clearing when another volley of fire erupted, the crack of rifles and the hiss of bullets cutting through the heat. Kane rolled the aircraft low, descending beneath the canopy, dodging a falling tree that had been shredded by her own fire, the fuselage rattling violently as the impact threatened to knock her off course. Her hands flew over the controls, adjusting for every sudden jolt. The SEALs diving behind cover the extraction point still yards away, but every second felt like an eternity. The enemy adapting to her tactics faster than she could predict. The radar blipped frantically, showing approaching threats from both flanks, new enemy clusters appearing from hidden positions. Kane fired again, short controlled bursts. Her fingers steadied the aircraft, shaking under the recoil, sparks flying from the wings as she banked sharply, clearing debris from the path. The SEALs sprinted toward the waiting helicopter, their movements precise but exposed, bullets whizzing past them, brushing branches and kicking up dirt and dust. Kane followed their path low and deadly through the forest, every maneuver critical, every split second a gamble with fate. She twisted the aircraft one last time, lining up a perfect strafing run, the GAU-8 roaring a storm of fire into the densest part of the ridge, the explosions ripping the enemy positions apart, the SEALs darting into cover. For just enough time to reach the edge of the clearing, Kane felt the aircraft tremble violently, the right wing shuddering from multiple impacts, the engines straining from the stress. But she held it steady, watching the men below move into relative safety, her pulse hammering her ears. The forest still alive with danger and the enemy waiting for any mistake that could destroy them all. The SEALs were almost at the extraction point, the helicopter's rotors visible through the smoke. The forest twisting around them, bullets and debris cutting dangerous paths, but Kane knew one wrong turn, and the mission would fail. She leveled the aircraft, steadying the controls, the engines screaming, the radar still flickering with unseen threats, the canopy reflecting sunlight in blinding flashes, and somewhere deep in the forest, a new movement appeared. A shadow among the trees, and Kane realized that the fight was far from over, and the danger had only shifted closer to them. The canopy pressed down on Major Kane as the A-10 thundered through the narrow corridor, the engines screaming, the vibration of the fuselage rattling every bone in her body. Her eyes flicked constantly between the radar and the HUD, tracking every movement of the SEALs. Below their dark shapes moving through the underbrush, smoke curling around them like a shield, but never enough to hide them completely. The enemy had regrouped faster than she anticipated, setting up hidden positions in the shadows. Every tree a potential threat, every branch a deadly trap. Kane twisted the aircraft hard, banking low beneath the canopy, scraping leaves and branches as tracer rounds zipped past her wings. The SEALs were halfway across the clearing now, pinned briefly by fire from a hidden ridge. Harris shouting orders, moving the team in perfect bursts. Kane could see the tension in their movements, the way they pressed low against the ground, calculating every inch the path through smoke and debris. She adjusted the throttle, pushing the A-10 even lower, the canopy brushing the tops of the tallest trees, the radar lighting up with multiple threats converging from unseen positions. She fired controlled bursts from the GAU-8 cannon, each explosion ripping apart enemy cover, the recoil shaking the aircraft violently, but holding steady enough to provide cover for the team. Yet the enemy was adapting faster than she could anticipate, positioning themselves in new flanking angles. Smoke and heat filled the narrow corridors of the forest. Kane banked sharply, twisting the aircraft around a fallen tree. the canopy scraping the top branches, sparks flying from the wingtips, bullets ricocheting off the fuselage, alarms screaming in the cockpit, the engines straining from, the impossible maneuvers. Below, the SEALs moved in silence, each step calculated as they darted from cover to cover, the enemy's sporadic fire cracking through the trees, each round a reminder of the razor-thin margin for error. Kane's pulse raced. As she lined up another strafing run, the radar lighting up with additional signatures. The enemy attempting to close in from all sides, the forest alive with movement and the smell of burning foliage. She dove low through a narrow gap, the canopy, brushing her helmet. The fuselage trembling violently from the strain, every control input amplified by the stress of proximity to trees and rocks. Her finger tightened on the trigger, unleashing another barrage of fire into the densest cluster of enemy positions. Explosions shaking the aircraft, the concussion rattling her skull, the SEALs moving beneath the curtain of smoke into temporary safety. But even as they advanced, Kane could see more shadows shifting along the ridges emerging from the undergrowth, and she realized that the enemy had anticipated this maneuver and was preparing to trap them at the edge of the clearing. The helicopter rotors were faintly visible through the smoke in the distance, the extraction point almost within reach. But the enemy had begun converging from hidden flanks, their fire intensifying, forcing the SEALs to take cover at the very edge. Kane twisted the aircraft, low-banking beneath the tree line, the radar lighting up with every new signature, her pulse syncing with the roar of the engines, the canopy reflecting sunlight in blinding streaks. She fired again, controlled bursts, cutting paths through the enemy positions, the explosions echoing through the forest, the vibration of the aircraft, threatening to throw her off course. Yet she held steady, her eyes locked on the SEALs and the path ahead. Branches snapped against the fuselage, bullets, ricocheted sparks flying from every impact, the GAU-8 roaring like a beast under her control. Her hands and arms burned from the strain of holding the aircraft steady each maneuver, a negotiation with physics and fate. Below, the SEALs moved through the final stretch toward the extraction zone, every step a gamble with death, the enemy still firing. Sporadically, but now facing relentless suppression from Kane's strafing runs. The radar flickered with more movement shadows among the trees, signaling enemy attempts to flank from unexpected angles. She bay. The morning was still and heavy with heat as the SEALs moved through the dense forest, their boots barely making a sound on the leaf-littered ground, their eyes scanning every shadow, every tree line for signs of movement. Major Olivia Kane crouched. In the tree line, her binoculars trained on the distant ridge where enemy positions had been reported. The team had been on the move for hours, exhausted, hungry, and tense, every step measured and cautious. The intel had said the target was within reach, but the enemy had them pinned and out of range of any close air support. Kane wiped sweat from her brow, the thought of flying a solo A-10 through this dense canopy flashing through her mind as impossible and necessary all at once. She tightened, her grip on the controls in the mental simulation running faster than reality itself. The radio crackled briefly, then fell silent. A warning and a whisper from the SEAL leader that the enemy had repositioned closer than expected, making the extraction route a death trap. Kane could see the flashes of rifles and the glint of scopes along the ridge, the men pinned down and moving in perfect synchronization to survive the incoming fire. She calculated the distance, the angle, and the speed required. To thread an A-10 through the treetops without support, her mind racing with scenarios that would make most pilots tremble, yet she knew that if she did not act, the SEALs would have nowhere to go. The ground below a minefield of fire and debris, and above them, nothing but the dense canopy stretching endlessly. She climbed into the cockpit of the waiting A-10 engines, humming with restrained fury, the ground crew stepping back, giving the universal sign for clearance. Her fingers danced over the switches, the targeting computer alive beneath her touch, the canopy reflecting the morning sun as she taxied to the edge of the tree line. The SEALs radioed their positions, marking them on the HUD in a dizzying maze of dots and lines that she would have to navigate while under fire. She took a deep breath, the forest stretching before her like a green ocean waiting to crush her at the first mistake. She pushed the throttle forward, the engine screaming as she lifted into the sky low enough that the tops of the tallest trees grazed her wings as she banked sharply toward the ridge bullets. Cracked through the canopy around her, the sound deafening in the confined space of the forest. The A-10 shuddered under the pressure, each maneuver, a negotiation with physics and fate. Every twist and turn brought her closer to the ridge, closer to the enemy fire that had already pinned the SEALs down. She lined up the first strafing run, the GAU-8 cannon spitting fire into the enemy positions, the recoil shaking the aircraft like a beast fighting to free itself from her grasp. The SEALs moved under her shadow, their progress slow but steady, every explosion a signal that they could move safely for the moment. Yet she could see other threats, emerging along the ridge, their weapons trained on every possible path, and she realized she had only seconds to act or they would be trapped. She banked low, ducking beneath a dense cluster of branches, her canopy almost brushing leaves, the sound of twigs snapping echoing through the fuselage as tracer rounds zipped past her wings. The aircraft groaned in protest, the engines screaming as she dove and rolled, weaving between the trees, calculating every millisecond of motion. Every muscle in her body screamed with effort, yet she felt a strange clarity, the chaos below a rhythm she could navigate. Her eyes flicked to the radar, the blips of enemy positions shifting in real time, a dangerous dance where one wrong move would mean catastrophe. She adjusted her aim, her finger poised above the trigger, ready to unleash another burst of fire into the densest part of the ridge. The first volley tore through the enemy lines, sending debris and smoke into the air, the SEALs sprinting for cover. Under the chaos, Kane felt the vibration of the aircraft as it shuddered from every impact, each flash of explosion a heartbeat in the rhythm of survival. But the ridge was only partially cleared, more targets appearing from hidden positions, the enemy regrouping faster than she had calculated. She banked again, descending lower, following the twisting path. The radar showed the SEALs moving into position, their voices brief bursts of orders over the comms, the tension so thick it seemed to stick to the skin. The trees closed in ahead, forcing her to make impossible turns and adjustments. The sound of snapping branches and gunfire blending into a cacophony that demanded precision and nerve. She leveled the aircraft over a narrow clearing, the SEALs visible beneath her shadow, their movements precise but still vulnerable. The radar showed new threats emerging from the tree line closer than anticipated. She clenched the controls, the canopy reflecting sunlight in a blinding flash. Her finger tightened on the trigger, the GAU-8 roaring to life, unleashing fire into the new enemy positions, the recoil throwing the aircraft into a shallow roll. But she held it steady, the SEALs moving beneath the veil of smoke and chaos as if guided by the sheer will of her machine. Yet she knew this was only the beginning. The ridge was far from secure, and the enemy would regroup faster than she could fire again, and the trees above hid yet another surprise. The forest closed in like a wall of green as Major Kane banked the A-10 low, ducking beneath the canopy, the branches snapping against the fuselage and scraping the wings, the roar of the engines blending with the crack of enemy fire below. Her eyes flicked between the HUD and the radar, each blip a life-or-death calculation. The SEALs were moving forward inch by inch, their progress measured and tense, the enemy regrouping on the far ridge, setting up hidden positions that could trap them in an instant. Kane adjusted her throttle, the vibration of the aircraft coursing through her bones as she prepared for another pass. She had no escort, no support, nothing but skill, instinct, and the roar of her cannon to protect the men below. She dove low over the ridge, the cannon spitting, Fire into the enemy positions, the explosion sending rock and debris tumbling down toward the SEALs, the smoke curling around their heads as they sprinted toward cover. Her hands were steady, her mind, a map of altitude angles, speed, and trajectory. Every millisecond calculated, yet the forest was unpredictable, the trees like living obstacles forcing last-second maneuvers that could tear the aircraft apart. The SEALs shouted over the comms, acknowledging the cover fire, their voices tense and, sharp with fear and determination, Kane felt her stomach tighten as tracer rounds whizzed past her canopy, sparks flying from the wings as some caught the edges of the fuselage. But she held steady for another run. A burst of enemy fire hit the tail. Rudder the A-10 shuddering violently, alarms screaming in the cockpit, the heat of friction biting through the hull. She gritted her teeth and pushed the throttle forward, weaving between trees so close the leaves whipped past the canopy, brushing. Her helmet, the SEALs below, moving like shadows guided by her presence, yet still exposed and vulnerable. The radar lit up again, new signatures emerging from behind a dense wall of brush hidden from her previous passes. She adjusted the targeting, system firing short controlled bursts, sending explosions into the enemy positions, the shockwave rattling the aircraft but clearing a path for the team to move. The SEALs were halfway across the clearing when another volley of fire erupted from a concealed ridge, their figures frozen for a moment as bullets tore through the underbrush. Kane banked the aircraft hard, climbing slightly to avoid a tree snapping from the impact, the engine screaming as she rolled over the ridge and lined up. Another pass. Her heart pounded, each beat syncing with the roar of the GAU-8 cannon. The world reduced to motion and sound, the SEAL's movements below every step and shift dictating her trajectory and timing. Every second a negotiation with fate. Every turn a gamble against gravity, and metal smoke and debris filled the air, making visibility nearly zero. Kane relied on instinct, adjusting the controls as branches lashed against the fuselage, sparks flying with every scrape, bullets whizzing. Past her canopy, the SEALs darting between shadows, using the chaos to their advantage, but still pinned by pockets of enemy fire. She twisted the aircraft low, dropping into a narrow corridor, the trees barely clearing the wings, the radar showing, multiple blips converging on their location. She fired again, short controlled bursts into the densest pockets, the explosions sending enemy combatants tumbling, but the sounds of distant voices over the comms warned her the threat was far from over. The SEALs were nearing the extraction point, a small clearing in the center of the forest, but the enemy had anticipated their movement. More fire erupted from above, and both flanks the team dropping low and returning fire, their movements desperate and precise. Kane banked the A-10 low again, letting the engine scream as she lined up a perfect strafing run, the cannon roaring to life, the recoil shaking the aircraft violently, her eyes scanning for new threats, yet the radar lit up again, blips. She had not seen before the enemy attempting to cut off the path at the far edge of the clearing. Her hands steady, her mind calculating how to thread the plane through the trees and debris before the team was trapped. The air seemed to vibrate with tension. Every sound amplified, the roar of the engines, the crack of bullets, the explosions below, merging into a rhythm of life and death. Kane pushed the aircraft lower, dodging a falling branch that had snapped from enemy fire, the SEALs diving behind cover as the trees shuddered around them. The extraction point was in sight just beyond another dense patch of forest, but the radar now showed multiple targets converging from all directions, her pulse rising as she realized